This episode is about grip and understanding what your fingers do whilst you're climbing and training. Knowing how your fingers work and how your grip works can really improve the efficiency of your training. Also understanding your hand morphology, like what shape are your hands, how long are your individual fingers. That'll determine what your grip types look like for you, and will change how you train. And then knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are can really benefit your training too. So finger strength doesn't actually come from your fingers. There's so much more going on in your forearm and through your hand that I definitely didn't realize when I first started climbing, and I'm still learning lots about. So firstly, we've got flexor muscles in our forearm down here. The flexor muscles are then attached to tendons which run all the way to our fingertips, and the tendons are held in place by pulleys. Our flexor muscle is kind of like the engine, that's where the power comes from, and then the tendon is what pulls our fingers, and then the pulleys hold the tendons in place. So to describe the pulleys a little better, if you imagine a fishing rod with the line going along the rod, and then little eyelets hold the line in place to the rod. That's what our pulleys are doing to our tendons. So ultimately, grip strength comes from the force that's created by the flexor muscles in our forearms. But we're not limited to the strength in the muscle alone. When the fingers are under load, there is friction between the tendon and the pulley, which helps to keep your hand in a static position. This friction, when the fingers are under load, makes it harder for you to open your fingers, and therefore it increases grip strength. This isn't actually the whole story, because we actually have muscles in our hands as well that play an important role in holding on. The most obvious muscle in our hand is our thumb muscle. This muscle's job is to move your thumb. We also have muscles in our palms. There are lumbricals, and they are for moving your palm. This way. Before we get into talking about grip types and the different grip types in climbing, we also need to consider the shape and size of our hand and our fingers. Our preferred grip types, our strengths and our weaknesses, and even what our hand looks like in a certain grip type will depend on the length of our fingers, the relative length of your fingers as well. Obviously everyone has different hands and different shaped hands, but the length of your fingers actually is really important and worth considering too. I'm now going to go through some different grip types. These are my definitions of these grip types. I've travelled all over the world and met lots of different people, and it seems that generally there's not kind of a consensus on what each grip type looks like, and I think that's because everyone has different hands, but I'm going to do my best to explain them, and I think it's worth going and seeing which grip types you prefer and how best to train your weaknesses and your strengths. Full crimp. A full crimp is usually where all four knuckles are bent. So all four are bent, and then our palm is engaged, so our lumbricals are engaged in here. It's actually quite awkward to point at. So four fingers bent, knuckles up, and then sometimes people have their thumb over, sometimes not. And this position, if your pinky is quite short, your pinky might be straight here to hook on the end, so it might not be that all four fingers are bent, but generally it looks like this. Half crimp is my favourite grip type. It's generally first three fingers bent with the pinky on and the pinky straight, and I always remember to have my first finger at 90 degrees, so it's quite a good way to maintain form when training, and I find this really useful. The reason it's my preferred grip type, I think, is because of my hand shape and my finger length. So my middle three fingers are quite similar in length, and then my pinky's quite short. So a full crimp, it feels like a lot of effort for my pinky, and it feels like a lot of work. But half crimp is really comfortable for me. Some people don't tend to use half crimp, and they actually keep their first finger, their pointer finger, quite straight. So it'll be almost like hooked on like this. I find this grip type really difficult to kind of do because of the way my hand is. So some people have the middle two fingers bent, pinky hooked on, and then pointer finger hooked on as well. And And this is often referred to as chisel grip, I think. But yeah, I've never trained it and never really used it actually. It's funny that there's a grip type I've never used. Drag or open hand is where 3 fingers are on the hold, usually. So if you've got a really long pinky finger, maybe it'll be on as well, but usually it's 3 fingers on the hold and then kind of all hooked on, and the length of your fingers will determine what your middle finger looks like. If your middle finger is quite long, it'll be quite bent in this position. If it's quite short or similar, then it'll be quite open in this position, but they're kind of more, much more straight, and it's a more passive hang. Last but not least, we have the pinch grip, which is where you are squeezing. So you have your fingers and your thumb both involved, and then there are so many different sizes and shapes of pinch that kind of determine what your hand will look like. So your hand could be more open or more closed, and then yeah, there's so many different sizes of and shape of pinch that it kind of changes what's going on within your hand as well. So you're squeezing, your thumb's really involved, your lumbricals are really involved as well, but how much they're working and in what way will depend on the size and shape of the pinch. Knowing and understanding grip strength, where the strength comes from, and different grip types, I think is really important to kind of improve your climbing and the efficiency of your training. I think if you also understand what your hand looks like in those different grip types, that's also really important too, and it will be different to your friends that climb, and yeah, just kind of gaining more knowledge on your body and your training and your climbing. In future episodes, we're going to go into how you can train your lumbricals, your forearms, your wrists, and kind of everything connected, because not only is it important to train on a fingerboard, it's also important to train kind of everything around it if you want to get the most out of your climbing and get stronger and better at climbing.